In our study of 1 Peter, we've been moving from his teaching on the blessings of salvation, and we've moved into the first major section of application, which is concerning holiness, which is chapter 1:13 through 2:12. And so far, we looked at the motivations in the first practical application of life based on the fact that you've been born again. The application that Peter is emphasizing and put first in his letter is holiness. And thus, if you have been born again, then your lives should be characterized by holiness. It should be something that's your center, or where you're traveling, the direction you're moving your life to. So Peter has thus far presented two motivations for holy living. Now we're going to zoom in. The first motivations were the positive motivations, which were, number one, he commands us to fix our hope on the future grace and rest. Until we are with God, we work. And life is a struggle. And then number two, we're to be holy. And since by grace we become children of a holy Father. So future grace and present grace. Those are positive motivations for holy living. And then he gives us a negative motivation, which is to live in fear of the discipline of our loving Father, of dishonoring the cost that he spent to redeem us, which was a precious life of his Son. And we want to be cognizant that we don't, that we're not opposing his intention, which is to bring us into holiness and to help us, to make us creatures that reflect his glory. So we had been talking about holiness, having the idea of being separated for God's purposes. But up until this point, Peter hasn't given us those purposes. He's just given us the motivations for why we should have holy living, holy lives. So this week, we're going to finish chapter 1. And we're going to look at Peter's teaching concerning holiness through love. Being separated for the purpose of love. So it's important to note that this is Peter's first example of what a holy life looks like. In this passage we're going to consider this morning, we're going to see Peter's command and two reasons why we are to live holy lives of love. Okay, first, let's read the whole passage. The passage says, "Since you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls for sincere love of the brethren, fervently love one another from the heart. For you have been born again, not of seed which is perishable, but imperishable, that is, through the living and enduring word of God. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of the grass. The grass withers, and the flower falls off. But the word of the Lord endures forever. And this is the word which was preached to you." Okay, so let's start with the human basis to live holy lives of love, which is that we purified our souls to love. The first part of verse 22. So let's read that again. "Since you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls for sincere love of the brethren." So what this is saying here is that the basis of love is that we have purified our souls. Grammatically, this sentence looks like this. "Since we have purified our souls, in obedience to the truth, for sincere love of the brethren." Those two clauses define or describe us purifying our souls. When it says that we purified our souls, it literally means to cause to be morally pure. And in Greek, it's called a perfect tense, which means a past action with present results. The past actions, we have purified our souls, our lives, and therefore we are continuing in a state of being pure and purifying. In Judaism, the idea of purification is a common thought in the first century, and it was viewed through ceremonial washings, dunking yourselves in water, or in a bath called the mikvah, or washing your hands. It's a removal of the dirt or anything that's unclean or filth, and it symbolized the removal of sin or spiritual filth or dirt, in which we get a lot of the idea of baptism, where we literally baptize in water that signifies the spiritual reality of having our sins completely cleansed. And here it says we are purifying, morally pure, becoming morally pure, our souls. And now in Greek, the soul can have a few different meanings, but here it means our lives. It's our lives before God are pure, and we are purifying them. So we purify our lives before God. How? How do we do that? That's where the second clause comes in. It's in obedience to the truth. So in obedience to the truth, we're accepting and receiving the gospel truth, the truth of God. It starts with the reception of the gospel. Now, this is where Peter is emphasizing the human will, our freedom, our individual choice, and our responsibility. We have purified our lives, our souls, when we, in obedience to the truth, became obedient to the truth. Obedience happened when we believed, when we first believed. That was the beginning of our salvation. So believing in the gospel was the first act of obedience to God. And that obedience, that life, it continues throughout our new existence as being children of God. And that moral purification continues in obedience to the truths that Jesus teaches us, his ways, his life. And when we talk about truth, we're obedient to the truth. It carries a sense of the true ways in which to please God, to live in a pleasing way, in a glorifying way. It includes not merely the gospel message, but also the whole of Christian teaching on doctrine and life. So we have already read this, that this is God's purpose in salvation earlier in Peter, where in 1 Peter 1:1 it says that he's chosen us to obey Jesus Christ and be sprinkled with his blood. Being sprinkled with his blood, remember, that's a covenant relationship, so we're supposed to, he's chosen us for salvation so that we would be people who are obeying Jesus as our chosen, or his chosen king, his Messiah, through a covenant relationship. And then also down in 14, it says, as obedient children, using the children metaphor, but obedience is there highly. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. So that obedience here as well is moving towards holiness, towards being set apart for God's purposes, having a pure life. And here, as well as here, obedience means, it includes repentance, the turning away from our former lusts, our former desires, when we were ignorant of God's truth. But once we are born again, once we have been obedient to the truth, that begins a life that is forever changed. That's how. Then we read about why. You've purified your souls. Why? For sincere love of the brethren. The phrase love of the brethren is actually one word in Greek. It's Philadelphia. It literally means brotherly love or brotherly affection. It's warm devotion to a mutual love of members of a family as children of God. Now, don't confuse this with the earthly examples. If you think, I don't really love my brother or my sister, or we don't really have that kind of, I don't want that kind of relationship that I had with my family, we want to be careful not to confuse those two things. This is the ideal. The very fact that you know that your family relationship is not exactly all that it should be shows that you have an ideal, that God has placed an ideal in you. How things should be. And that is what we purified our souls for a sincere love of the brethren, of a real, close, affectionate family group the ones that we desire for, that our hearts long for. And the word for sincere there is anhupokriton. Hypocrite? That's where we get a word for hypocrite. It means without hypocrisy. So therefore, it's what is on the inside, your desires, your heart, is also reflected on the outside. It's a true desire for sincere love. So, have you achieved that? Is that something that you have? Is that something that we have here? Do you desire a family relationship, a connection, a community with other believers? Are you moving in that direction? That's something that is inherent to salvation. We often think, especially in our country, with our individualistic emphasis, is that salvation is just my relationship with God. But what we don't understand is when you enter in that relationship with God, you enter into a family, into His people. It's inherently relational, not just upward, but also outward. So as a side note, one's covenant relationship with God is never an individual matter. Becoming a child of God means necessarily coming into relationship with others who are also chosen. The intended earthly result of becoming a child of God is a loving family among God's people, which each believer entered into. Therefore, Peter gives the command to live holy lives of love in the second half of verse 22, where it says, fervently love one another. So putting that together, if we entered into the family of God with the intended results of a sincere family love, then we need to love. Then we need to act that way. And thus, fervently loving one another from the heart is how we get there, how we get to that brotherly love, that community that's warmly affectionate and devoted to one another. The word for love here is not phileo, it's agape. And this week in my studies, I've nuanced my understanding and definition of agape love. So my definition now is the expression of one's desire for the good and what is right for another for the glory of God, with the understanding of defining good by God and defining what is right by God. Love will include self-sacrifice, but will result in self-fulfillment from the joys and blessings of God. And the reason why I'm saying I've changed a little bit is I used to say it was an act of self-sacrifice and selflessness as a desire for good and righteousness. It focused on what we don't do, when love is actually more focused on what we do. It will include this, but its emphasis is on the expression of doing good for another and doing what's right for another, for God's glory. So this kind of love, the agape love, is exercised by the will rather than emotion. It's determined not by the beauty or desirability of the object, but by the noble intentions of the one who is loving. And Peter says we're to love one another fervently. The word fervently means being eager to persevere in love, to love without ceasing, zealously loving. He's emphasizing and commanding them that their affection must be constant, it must be enduring, unshaken by adversity or shifting circumstances. It's something that we have to be committed to. And that love that we have to be committed to, it can't be just external. It just can't be, okay, I'm supposed to love you, so therefore, all right, I'll do this. It has to be from the heart. From the heart corresponds to sincerity. And thus, it's not merely in external actions, which will be hypocritical. It's not just acting. Remember, to be a hypocrite in the ancient world means to wear a mask. It's associated with acting in theater. So here, it's love that it's coming from your heart's desire. So love is the dominant characteristic of the believer that distinguishes him or her as a follower of Jesus. And in fact, Jesus said in John 13:35, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." It is so important that when asked about what's the greatest commandment, the greatest commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, meaning your whole person. But Jesus then said, the second is like it, almost as if he's saying you can't really separate the two. The second is like it, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So it's inherent that if someone loves God, then they are loving their neighbor. They're loving one another. 1 John 3:10 says, "By this the children of God and the children of the devil are obvious. Anyone who does not practice righteousness is not from God, nor the one who does not love his brother." So those who are practicing righteousness and are loving are shown to be children of God. Those who are not practicing righteousness and do not love their brother are shown to be children of Satan, characteristic of Satan. And then Galatians 5:22, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love." The reason for that, the reason why we can obviously tell from the children of God from the children of Satan is that love comes from the Spirit's power. You don't have it in you. You need God's power and strength. And thus, when you see it in people, you know that it's God working in and through you. So, when we became obedient to the truth of the gospel, it was not merely an intellectual acceptance of doctrine or truth. It must also result in a transformation of how we live, how we treat others. And the central purpose of Christ's redemption is a moral transformation. It's built on the starting point of love. If our goal of purifying our lives in obedience to God's truth is a sincere love from the brethren, how do we get there? We get there by loving, by being devoted to acts of love and attitudes of love, viewing people out of love. So when we are unceasingly loving one another, then a family relationship of love can exist and can grow. That family relationship, it's going to take time. It's going to take trust. And we get there when we grow in our relationships because we love one another. I want you to show you what Paul says about what it looks like to love, agape love from the heart. In Romans 12:9, it says, "Let love be without hypocrisy." Again, same parallel, except this is agape. Let your attitude, an expression, a desire for what's good and right for others, for the glory of God, be without hypocrisy. Not fake, but real. And this is how you do it. The New American Standard puts periods and makes these things commands. In Greek, this is the main clause, and the rest of these things are participles that describe how you get there. What do you need is your mind frame and your attitude? What does an inner heart of love look like? So in essence, what Paul is saying here is when love is without hypocrisy, we will abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. Verse 10, we will be devoted to one another in brotherly love and give preference to one another in honor. The word devoted there actually means love dearly. When our love is without hypocrisy, we will be loving each other dearly in brotherly love. We'll give preference to one another, to outdo one another with showing respect and honor to each other. Not lagging behind in diligence, but fervent in the spirit. Not just, I may get to it, or I don't really care. But fervent in the spirit. Yes, I want to do this. This is something I want to do. Serving as a slave the Lord. Rejoicing in the hope and persevering in tribulation. Devoted to prayer. And contributing to the needs of the saints. Practicing hospitality. That is what the mind frame looks like, and our attitude or inner person looks like when we have and practice love that's without hypocrisy. And when it talks about contributing to the saints, it means sharing sharing in their needs, sharing with one another. Now, I wanted to put this here because right now, Peter doesn't give any examples of how to love. Love is a big word, and I gave a general definition, but how does that actually work out in your life in the particulars? He's going to go into that more next week and in the weeks to follow. But I wanted to give you how Paul views it and how Paul defines it. And here, even here, when we are devoted to one another in brotherly love, this is our attitude, our goal. And when this is our goal, then our love will be without hypocrisy. So you see the reciprocal nature of their relationship. This has to be our goal, and this is how we get there. But that has to be our mind frame. The second thing that we just saw was the command to love, to live out holy lives of love. So we responded to the gospel of Christ, purifying our lives and becoming obedient to the truth, which includes being committed to brotherly love among God's people. Therefore, we were to follow through and really love continually, just like Christ loved us.